They said the cameras failed. They said the guards were asleep. They said a man with secrets powerful enough to rattle empires simply took his own life. But if you listen closely, beneath the headlines, beneath the silence, there's a story still breathing. A story too big to be buried, too dark to forget. Tonight, I want to take you down a corridor few dare to walk. A corridor of private islands, sealed court files, secret flight logs, broken hard drives, and the most untouchable names in modern history. This is not a tale of justice. It is a tale of power, how it protects itself, how it consumes, and how it sometimes, just sometimes, leaves a trail behind. The name is Jeffrey Epstein. And the question isn't just how he lived. The real question, the one that keeps echoing long after the headlines faded, is, who allowed it all to happen? You've heard fragments. You've seen the memes. But tonight, I want you to hear it slowly, completely, like a puzzle assembling itself in the dark. Because this story, this real-life web of manipulation and mystery, matters more than ever. Before we begin, I want to thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. If you're listening right now, perhaps tucked under a blanket, the lights low, the world outside hushed, I invite you to be present. Let your mind drift into the folds of this strange, unsettling truth. And if you feel this kind of storytelling should reach more people, please take a second to like this video. It really helps the story travel further. Subscribe if you haven't yet. This channel is a small candle in a dark library, and every new light helps us keep the stories alive. And tell me in the comments, what part of the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Are you ending your day? Starting a long night? Or simply seeking quiet company in the early hours? Now, take a deep breath. Let your body rest. The story is about to begin. It was August 10th, 2019. A humid Saturday morning inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. A facility once considered one of the most secure federal detention centers in the country, used to housing terrorists, drug lords, and high-profile criminals. Yet, on that morning, the silence was overwhelming. No shouting. No footsteps. Just a strange stillness. Like the air was holding its breath. At approximately 6:30 a.m., the unthinkable was discovered. Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced financier with global connections and an ever-growing list of alleged victims, was found unresponsive in his cell. He was 66 years old. The official report said suicide by hanging. But almost immediately, the questions came flooding in. Why were both correctional officers assigned to watch him reportedly asleep? Why had the cameras malfunctioned on that specific night, in that specific hallway? Why was he taken off suicide watch just days earlier, despite a prior incident in which he had allegedly harmed himself? And perhaps the most troubling question of all, was it really suicide? Or was something, or someone, making sure he'd never speak again? That single moment, the discovery of his body, did not bring closure. It opened 1,000 doors. And behind each one, a darker shadow. You see, Epstein was no ordinary inmate. He was a man many believed had knowledge of other people's secrets. Secrets powerful enough to ruin careers, destroy reputations, even destabilize institutions. There was the island in the Caribbean, the black book of contacts, the infamous flight logs, the names whispered in court documents, some redacted, some not. At the time of his death, Epstein was awaiting trial for charges that could have finally brought some clarity to his past. But just like that, he was gone. And the silence that followed was louder than any courtroom verdict. For many, the details didn't add up. Why was a high-profile inmate like Epstein left alone in a cell with no camera coverage? Why had both guards falsified logs, claiming to have checked on him when they hadn't? Why did the autopsy report raise as many questions as it answered, with a respected forensic pathologist, hired by Epstein's own brother, concluding that the injuries were more consistent with homicide than suicide? The phrase, "He didn't kill himself," exploded online. At first a meme, then a mantra. A cultural pressure point poking at something unspoken, unsettling, and unresolved. Because whether you believe Epstein took his own life, or whether you believe someone took it from him, there's one undeniable truth. The death of Jeffrey Epstein didn't mark the end of a scandal. It was just the beginning of a much deeper mystery. One where silence doesn't equal peace, but protection. Where the absence of noise is the loudest alarm of all. And so, in the stillness of that cold, fluorescent-lit cell, a man vanished. Not just physically, but narratively. His voice was cut. But his story? It only grew louder. Tonight, we begin walking that story from its darkest chapter. From the silence that screamed. From the moment a single cell in New York stopped time, and started a fire that still burns in the minds of millions. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was, by every outward appearance, a man of success. Elegant suits, private jets, luxury townhouses in Manhattan, exclusive contacts on speed dial. To many, he seemed like just another high-powered financier, wealthy, well-connected, and intensely private. But look even slightly beneath the surface, and you'll find a life cloaked in contradictions. The truth is, no one ever really knew who Jeffrey Epstein was. Not entirely. Some called him a hedge fund manager. Others, a philanthropist. To certain elites, he was a mysterious genius. To his accusers, he was something far more sinister. He walked among billionaires, royalty, presidents, scientists, artists. Yet no one could ever clearly explain what, exactly, he did for a living. His origin story was hazy. Born in Brooklyn in 1953 to a working-class family, Epstein was bright, but never earned a college degree. Still, he managed to land a teaching position at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, an elite private institution where he taught physics and mathematics. But this wasn't just any school. It was a place where the sons and daughters of New York's most influential families received their education. And it was there that Epstein began making connections. Connections that would ultimately launch him into the rarefied air of global wealth and power. One of those early connections was with Alan Ace Greenberg, the chairman of Bear Stearns. Despite his lack of formal credentials, Epstein was hired by the investment bank, quickly rising through the ranks. How? No one really knows. Soon, Epstein left Wall Street and began managing money independently. Or so he said. He claimed to work only with clients worth over $1 billion. But not a single verified client list was ever made public. There were no annual reports, no investment portfolios to scrutinize. Everything was behind closed doors. And behind those doors, rumors swirled. Some believed he was a financial wizard. Others suspected he was a front, managing wealth not for the rich, but for those who preferred not to be seen at all. There were whispers that he may have been involved in intelligence work, that his parties and private gatherings weren't about networking, but about surveillance, about leverage. Over time, Epstein's homes became gathering places for celebrities, scholars, and political figures. He hosted elite dinners filled with Nobel laureates, Silicon Valley pioneers, and foreign dignitaries. At face value, it was all perfectly respectable. But beneath the polished exterior was something colder, something calculated, His properties were outfitted with surveillance cameras everywhere. Rooms that looked like luxury suites, but were wired. Audio, video, everything recorded. But why? Who was watching, and who was being watched? Even his persona was a paradox. He spoke of science and philanthropy. He donated millions to universities, think tanks, and research institutions. He funded conversations about artificial intelligence, evolutionary biology, and transhumanism. He even mingled with renowned scientists, some of whom would later distance themselves from him. But all of this, the charm, the elegance, the endless wealth, was just the surface of the painting. And when the frame began to crack, what emerged was not a portrait of a man, but a mirror reflecting back the darker corners of power, privilege, and unchecked access. Because Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just elusive. He was built to be that way. He moved like a ghost between high society and secrecy. And to this day, we're left asking, was he a financier? A predator? A pawn? Or something else entirely? What is known is that his name alone could open doors most people never even see. And for reasons we may never fully understand, those doors often stayed open long after the first warning signs began to appear. In the chapters ahead, we'll pull back the layers, following the trail of relationships, rumors, and revelations that surrounded this man, and the dark web he helped weave around the world. Because to understand the mystery of Epstein's death, we must first unravel the mystery of his life. Jeffrey Epstein came from very little. No Ivy League pedigree, no family fortune, no storied legacy. He was born on January 20th, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, a borough known for its grit and working-class neighborhoods. His father worked for the New York City Parks Department. His mother was a homemaker. There were no mansions, no private tutors, no elite connections. Yet somehow, within a few decades, this ordinary boy from Brooklyn would become a man who owned a private island, a Manhattan townhouse said to be the largest private residence in the city, and a black book of contacts that read like the guest list at a world summit. How? That question haunts almost every chapter of Jeffrey Epstein's life. After graduating from Lafayette High School, he enrolled at Cooper Union, and later New York University, though he never completed a degree at either. Still, despite having no college diploma, Epstein managed to land a teaching position at the prestigious Dalton School on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was the late 1970s. Dalton was known for its academic excellence and its student body of New York's elite. Epstein, reportedly charming and confident, taught math and physics. But more important than the equations he scribbled on the chalkboard were the connections he was quietly making. One of the students' fathers was Alan Ace Greenberg, the chairman of Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful investment banks at the time. Despite Epstein's lack of formal qualifications, Greenberg was impressed by his intellect and social dexterity, and offered him a position at Bear Stearns. It was a move that baffled many. How does a 20-something-year-old high school teacher with no degree leap straight into high finance? But Epstein wasn't playing by the same rules as everyone else. He had something more valuable than a diploma. He had charm, confidence, and a mysterious ability to make people trust him. At Bear Stearns, he reportedly worked in options trading and later in a special clients division. He was secretive, even among colleagues. Some said he was brilliant. Others found him arrogant and evasive. Then, in 1981, just 4 years after joining, Epstein resigned. Or was asked to leave, depending on which version of the story you believe. But what came next is where things get strange. Epstein claimed he started managing the assets of only the ultra-wealthy. He would often say that he wouldn't even consider a client unless they had a net worth of at least $1 billion. Yet to this day, only one client has ever been publicly confirmed: Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, the parent company behind Victoria's Secret and other major retail chains. The nature of Epstein's relationship with Wexner was unusually close. He didn't just manage his money. He had power of attorney. He could sign checks, buy and sell real estate, even move assets freely. This connection opened unimaginable doors. Epstein moved into a 7-story mansion on East 71st Street in Manhattan, owned by a trust tied to Wexner. He began traveling frequently, sometimes aboard private jets. He hosted lavish dinners filled with scientists, politicians, and artists. And yet, there was still no public-facing business. No investment firm with an office. No employees. No website. Just Epstein. A man who seemed to float effortlessly through circles of influence, cloaked in mystery. He told different stories to different people. To some, he was a financier. To others, an advisor. Sometimes he implied he worked with governments. Other times, he alluded to knowledge so sensitive it couldn't be discussed at all. That vagueness became part of his allure. And perhaps part of his shield. By the early 1990s, he had solidified his place in high society. He bought homes in Paris, New Mexico, Florida, and the now infamous island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James. He dressed well, spoke smoothly, and never seemed to need to explain himself. He was surrounded by people who should have asked more questions, but rarely did. And maybe that was by design. Because when a man becomes a mystery, when no one knows quite what he does, or how he does it, it becomes difficult to pin anything down. Harder to expose, easier to excuse. And in Jeffrey Epstein's case, that vagueness helped him build a life that was both extremely visible and entirely hidden. It's worth asking, was this rise the result of brilliance? Luck? Or something more calculated? Something more transactional? In any case, his sudden ascent from a Brooklyn classroom to billion-dollar boardrooms left behind very few documents, very few witnesses, and a trail that even seasoned investigators found difficult to follow. But what's clear is this. By the end of the 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein was not just wealthy. He was untouchable. Or at least, he appeared to be. And as we'll see in the next chapter, the life he built wasn't just designed for comfort. It was designed to conceal. In a world where credentials are everything, where resumes are scanned for Ivy League degrees and MBA programs become golden tickets to boardrooms, Jeffrey Epstein stood as an exception. He had no degree, no formal license in finance, no academic pedigree to speak of. And yet, he landed a position at Bear Stearns, one of the most prestigious investment banks on Wall Street, during a time when competition for entry-level roles was as fierce as ever. So how did he get in? The answer isn't entirely clear. And that's precisely what makes this part of Epstein's story so unnerving. After dropping out of both Cooper Union and NYU's Courant Institute, Epstein seemed to pivot toward teaching. In the mid-1970s, he was hired by the Dalton School, an elite private school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was, by all accounts, an unusual hire. Dalton was, and still is, an institution that prides itself on academic rigor and excellence. Its faculty were expected to be among the brightest in their fields. And yet, here was Epstein, a 20-something without a degree, teaching advanced math and physics to some of the wealthiest and most powerful families in New York. But even then, His charm and confidence were difficult to ignore. He spoke with ease, carried himself with authority, and seemed to project a quiet sense of brilliance. And that charisma didn't go unnoticed. Among the students' parents was Alan Ace Greenberg, the chairman of Bear Stearns. Greenberg was known for taking chances on unconventional talent, and something about Epstein caught his eye. Within months, Epstein had made a leap few could dream of. From high school teacher to junior trader at one of the most competitive firms on Wall Street. No degree. No formal training. Just instinct. Or perhaps something more. At Bear Stearns, Epstein quickly positioned himself as someone who could think outside the box. He worked in the options department, a field that required mathematical precision and an appetite for risk. Colleagues said he was bold, persuasive, and always networking. But even then, questions lingered. He didn't seem to follow the typical path. He operated with unusual autonomy, rarely explaining how he managed to get certain clients or seal major deals. He didn't just play the game of finance, he bent it. He also cultivated relationships far beyond the walls of the trading floor. Epstein was seen at high-end restaurants, networking with foreign businessmen, political advisors, even journalists. He understood that power wasn't just about money, it was about access. And he was mastering the art of becoming indispensable to those who had it. But in 1981, just 4 years after joining the firm, Epstein left under mysterious circumstances. Some reports say he was asked to leave due to policy violations. Others suggest he resigned of his own accord, ready to start a new chapter. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. He left Bear Stearns with a set of relationships that would become the foundation of his fortune. And possibly the scaffolding for something much darker. After leaving the firm, Epstein claimed to manage the assets of the ultra-wealthy. He said his services were too exclusive for public knowledge. He claimed to only take on clients with net worths in the billions. But again, no records. No proof. No company profile. Just Epstein, operating from behind a velvet curtain. And the most curious part? No one seemed to question it. Perhaps it was his intelligence. He was, by all accounts, quick-witted and skilled at persuasion. Perhaps it was his network. He knew the right people, said the right things, made the right promises. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Some former associates speculated, even then, that Epstein wasn't just a financier. That his business model wasn't just about wealth, but information. That he was collecting favors, secrets, leverage. That his real value wasn't in what he invested, but in what he knew. And so, this man, who never earned a college diploma, had somehow embedded himself into the very heart of Wall Street. Not because he followed the rules, but because he understood the game behind the game. And in that understanding, Epstein began to build a structure not just of wealth, but of control. He knew how to present just enough legitimacy to be respected, and just enough mystery to avoid being questioned. In a world obsessed with titles and qualifications, Jeffrey Epstein rose without either. He proved, dangerously, that influence doesn't always require a diploma. Sometimes, it just takes confidence, connections, and a willingness to operate where most people are afraid to look. The story of his rise continues in the next chapter, when his connections evolve into a global web of elites, and the real power of his social network begins to take shape. If money was Epstein's armor, then his relationships were his shield. Over time, Jeffrey Epstein constructed more than just a fortune. He built a social ecosystem, a carefully cultivated network of politicians, royalty, tech visionaries, academics, media moguls, and celebrities. And while no one can say exactly what each person knew, The breadth of this network was staggering. They dined with him. They traveled with him. They attended his parties and invited him to theirs. And as each connection was made, Epstein's image solidified, not just as a financier, but as someone who was deeply embedded in the world's most influential circles. Let's begin with one of the most talked about names, Prince Andrew, Duke of York. The second son of Queen Elizabeth II was publicly photographed with Epstein numerous times. More than just acquaintances, they were known to have spent extended time together, most infamously after Epstein's first release from jail in 2009. Their friendship raised eyebrows around the globe, especially after a widely circulated photograph emerged, showing Prince Andrew with his arm around a young woman later identified as Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most vocal accusers. Then there were the presidents. Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States, had traveled multiple times on Epstein's private jet, often referred to by the media as the Lolita Express. Flight logs confirmed at least a dozen trips. Clinton's spokesperson later stated that Secret Service agents were present, and that he was unaware of any criminal activity. Still, the optics remained troubling. Why had a former U.S. president spent so much time with such a mysterious and controversial figure? Donald Trump, too, had known Epstein, at least socially, for years. They were photographed together at social events in the 1990s and early 2000s. Trump once remarked on Epstein as a terrific guy who liked women on the younger side. Their relationship, though publicly downplayed after Epstein's arrest, raised questions about the depth and nature of Epstein's influence in political and social spheres. But the list did not end there. Tech giants, from Silicon Valley titans to academic leaders, were connected, either directly or indirectly. Epstein donated to prestigious institutions such as Harvard University, funding scientific research and cultivating a reputation as a philanthropist. Yet behind the veneer of generosity, questions swirled. Was philanthropy another tool in his network to gain legitimacy and access? Celebrities and media moguls also orbited Epstein's world, attending lavish gatherings where power and pleasure mingled. Names whispered in investigative reports include well-known actors, musicians, and influential journalists. This network was not simply a collection of acquaintances. It was a fortress of influence, built carefully and deliberately to shield Epstein and potentially to protect others. As we unravel these connections, it becomes clear that Epstein was not just a man of wealth. He was a man of power, intertwined with the highest echelons of society. And in this web of the wealthy, each thread tells a story, some innocent, others far more troubling. There is a small island tucked away in the warm, glittering waters of the Caribbean. From the air, it looks like paradise: lush greenery, pristine beaches, a hilltop mansion gazing out over the sea. But beauty, as history often reminds us, can be a veil. The island is called Little St. James, and for years it was one of Jeffrey Epstein's most private and most protected properties. But beyond the manicured grounds and imported palm trees, the stories that have emerged from this island are anything but tranquil. Epstein purchased Little St. James in 1998 for a reported $7.95 million. From that point on, he transformed it into what some described as a secluded retreat. Others called it something far more chilling: a fortress of secrecy. He installed state-of-the-art security systems, patrolled the waters with private boats, hired loyal staff, many of whom were brought in from overseas. And most importantly, he kept it off-limits to outsiders. Only a select few were ever invited, and even fewer ever spoke of what they saw. From a distance, it looked like a sanctuary for the elite. Guests arrived by helicopter. Meals were prepared by private chefs. Conversations happened behind closed doors, far away from reporters, cameras, and accountability. But over time, the island earned another name among investigators and survivors: the Island of Secrets. According to multiple testimonies, including sworn court documents, Little St. James was not simply a place to relax. It was allegedly a hub for exploitation. Women, many of whom were underage at the time, have described being brought to the island under the guise of modeling opportunities, education, or employment. But once there, their stories shift dramatically. Some recount being pressured into unwanted encounters. Others describe feeling isolated, monitored, and unable to leave. A few said they were flown in specifically for Epstein or his associates, trapped in a disturbing cycle of silence and control. One of the most jarring details repeated by several survivors was the island's atmosphere. A mix of luxury and surveillance. Rooms were said to be equipped with hidden cameras. Guests were allegedly recorded, often without their knowledge. The implication being that these recordings could later be used for leverage. This theory, of compromise by design, adds yet another layer of darkness to the story. Was Little St. James not only a place of personal indulgence, but also a tool? A machine for collecting secrets and holding them as insurance? Satellite images have revealed unusual structures across the island. One in particular stood out. A bizarre blue and white striped building with a golden dome on top. At first glance, it appeared ornamental. But when images of the structure began circulating online, theories erupted. Some speculated it was a music room or a private study. Others, more ominously, suggested it was a panic room or even something ritualistic. There is no confirmed explanation. And after Epstein's arrest in 2019, the building was quietly removed. To this day, the full scope of what happened on that island remains unclear. Much of it is clouded by redacted documents, sealed court filings, and the reluctance, understandable or otherwise, of many witnesses to speak. But what is known is this: Little St. James wasn't just another luxury property. It was a physical symbol of Epstein's power. It existed outside the reach of traditional oversight. It allowed him to curate an environment entirely on his own terms, where access was granted only to the chosen few, and almost nothing was recorded officially. Even law enforcement faced unusual barriers. When authorities raided the island in 2019, after Epstein's death, they reportedly found computers, hard drives, and evidence that suggested years of activity. But much of what was seized has yet to be made public. And many fear that key materials were removed, destroyed, or concealed long before investigators arrived. In the end, Little St. James stands not only as a geographic location, but as a metaphor. An island in every sense of the word, isolated, protected, and deeply disturbing. A place where whispers replaced laws, where power thrived in the shadows, and where, if the stories are true, some of the world's darkest transactions took place under the sun. The secrets of that island may never be fully known, but its silence continues to echo, reminding us how easily the world can look away, especially when the view is beautiful and the guests are powerful. He had a private jet, a fleet of luxury cars, mansions in Manhattan, Palm Beach, Paris, and New Mexico, a private island in the Caribbean, art collections, rare books, custom interiors, private chefs. But the one thing Jeffrey Epstein never seemed to have was a visible business. No Wall Street firm bore his name. No public investment portfolio could be tracked. No employee lists, press conferences, or investor meetings. Just wealth. Enormous, unquestioned, uninterrupted wealth. And so, the question remains, perhaps the most elusive in the entire story. Where did Jeffrey Epstein's money come from? The official explanation, repeated in interviews and court filings, is that Epstein was a financial advisor. He allegedly managed money for clients worth $1 billion or more, specializing in tax strategies, offshore accounts, and complex asset management. But no one, not even experienced financial journalists, could identify more than one confirmed client. Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret. Epstein reportedly became Wexner's financial advisor in the 1990s and soon gained an extraordinary level of control. He had power of attorney. He could sign legal documents, move assets, and even make real estate purchases in Wexner's name. One of those properties, the massive Manhattan mansion Epstein lived in, later valued at over $77 million, was once owned by a Wexner trust. This connection raised eyebrows. Why would a cautious, disciplined billionaire hand over so much control to a man with no formal credentials and no verified track record? Some speculated that Epstein had an uncanny ability to earn trust. Others whispered that he knew too much, that he traded in secrets as much as he did in stocks. And what about his other so-called clients? No names were ever revealed. No contracts ever shown. No third-party confirmations. In a world where financial advisors routinely advertise their expertise, publish reports, and cultivate reputations, Epstein remained a ghost. He claimed to run a firm called Financial Trust Company, based in the Virgin Islands. But there were no publicly available investment records. No performance benchmarks. No website. No marketing. Just a name, and the promise of discretion. His fortune, by all appearances, operated in shadows. And it didn't behave like normal money. According to investigators, Epstein had access to an unusually large amount of liquid cash. Tens of millions of dollars, ready to be moved at will. He also held a complex network of offshore accounts, shell companies, and foundations, some legitimate, others opaque. There was the J. Epstein Virgin Islands Foundation, through which he made certain donations. There were multiple LLCs tied to his properties, private aircraft, and business operations. And there were reports of trusts within trusts, layers upon layers, designed to obscure the flow of funds and the true beneficiaries. This wasn't the kind of wealth you stumble into. It was engineered. It was protected. And more importantly, it was untraceable. Even experienced forensic accountants struggled to reconstruct his financial trail. There were too many jurisdictions. Too many gaps. Too many people unwilling to speak. Some believed Epstein may have been involved in illicit financial activities, money laundering, tax sheltering, or even facilitating transactions for criminal enterprises. Others suggested he worked in intelligence, using his access to elites to gather sensitive information in exchange for protection. And then there's the theory that Epstein's true product was leverage. Not advice. Not investments. But access. That his wealth came from positioning himself as a gatekeeper between powerful people and their secrets. That he knew how to provide what others desired. And knew how to document it. If this theory holds weight, then his fortune wasn't made on Wall Street. It was made in rooms without cameras. Or perhaps, rooms with cameras that only he controlled. And that would explain why no one asked too many questions. Because if Epstein held secrets that could ruin reputations, destroy careers, or expose entire institutions, his wealth was more than money. It was a shield. And a weapon. In the end, we're left with a man who lived like a billionaire. but left behind no clear map of how he became one. Even after his death, the total value of his estate fluctuated in reports, from hundreds of millions to over $1 billion. Assets were tied up in trusts. Others were suddenly liquidated. Some vanished altogether. And as courts, lawyers, and survivors tried to untangle it all, one thing became clear. Epstein's fortune wasn't built to be admired. It was built to disappear when questioned. So when we ask, where did all the money come from? We might also be asking, who wanted it kept quiet? Because in the world Epstein operated in, money wasn't just power. It was silence. And silence, in the right hands, is the most valuable currency of all. In the world of power and privilege, relationships are currency. But what happens when the currency itself becomes a weapon? Jeffrey Epstein didn't just build a network of the wealthy and influential. He wove an intricate web. A web where every thread connected not only to people, but to secrets, favors, and leverage. At first glance, his relationships appeared to be mutually beneficial. Billionaires enjoyed his company. Politicians appreciated his access. Celebrities found themselves invited to exclusive gatherings. Philanthropists accepted his donations and partnerships. But beneath this glossy surface lay a far more complex reality. Was Epstein's network a genuine circle of friends and collaborators? Or was it a carefully constructed trap, designed to ensnare and control? Many experts suggest the latter. According to survivors and investigators, Epstein's charm and generosity were tools of manipulation. He offered wealth, prestige, and opportunities, only to use those gifts as leverage over his guests. Some of those entangled in his world later described feeling indebted, vulnerable, or even threatened. Conversations once friendly turned into quiet understandings, unspoken rules about silence, discretion, and complicity. This is a classic playbook of power brokers. You cultivate trust and friendship. You offer benefits that seem too good to refuse. You create a dependency. Then, when the time is right, you use the knowledge you've gathered, not just to protect yourself, but to control others. Epstein was rumored to have recorded intimate moments with guests at his properties, sometimes without their knowledge. These recordings were allegedly stored as potential blackmail material. The implications are staggering. Imagine a world where the elite are all connected, but also all vulnerable, where reputations are fragile, and a single secret can topple dynasties. In such a world, Epstein was not just a socialite. He was a gatekeeper, holding the keys to doors others thought permanently locked. His friendships with powerful men and women, whether royal, political, or corporate, were never just social calls. They were investments. And like any investment, they came with expectations. Some suggest that this web of influence shielded Epstein from prosecution for years. That powerful figures, wary of exposure, discouraged investigations or muted accusations. Others speculate that intelligence agencies may have used Epstein's network as a source of information and leverage. But if Epstein's network was also a trap, what does that mean for those who entered it willingly? Were they complicit? Naive? Or victims themselves? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Power is intoxicating. It can blind even the most cautious. And when secrets are at stake, self-preservation often trumps justice. What is undeniable, however, is that Epstein's web was unlike any other. It combined friendship with fear, influence with intimidation, access with vulnerability. It was a delicate balance, and one that kept him protected for decades. Tonight, as we continue, we will delve deeper into this web, exploring not just who Epstein knew, but how he used those relationships to build a fortress of silence around himself. Because in the world of power, the lines between ally and adversary are often blurred. And the most dangerous networks are the ones you never see coming. Behind every scandal lies a story. And behind Jeffrey Epstein's, those stories are some of the most unsettling of our time. The public first learned of Epstein's alleged crimes through brave survivors who stepped forward with accounts that were both chilling and heartbreaking. Women who described how they were lured into a world that promised opportunity, safety, and escape, only to find themselves trapped in cycles of exploitation and abuse. These were not random encounters. They were carefully orchestrated. Grooming, a calculated process of manipulation and control, was at the core of Epstein's operations. Young girls, sometimes as young as 14 or 15, were targeted for their vulnerability. Promises of modeling careers, education, or financial support created the initial trust. Recruiters, often young women themselves, sometimes victims turned complicit, would befriend these girls, drawing them into Epstein's orbit. Once inside, the illusion shattered. Survivors describe how they were introduced to a world of power and secrecy, where refusing an invitation or request came with consequences both subtle and severe. They spoke of being coerced into inappropriate encounters, not only with Epstein but with his influential associates. Of being told to stay silent, under threat of ruin or violence. The silence surrounding these crimes was, for years, deafening. Many survivors were pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements, legally binding them to secrecy. These agreements, combined with threats and intimidation, effectively muted their voices for decades. Even when cases surfaced, Epstein's team fought aggressively, employing high-powered lawyers, settlements, and public relations campaigns designed to discredit accusers and protect their client. Yet, despite these barriers, the truth persisted. Testimonies revealed patterns of behavior that transcended individual incidents, painting a portrait of a meticulously engineered system of abuse. The scale was staggering. Recruitment across multiple states and countries. Coordination involving dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals. And the silence that protected Epstein also shielded others. Friends, associates, and even bystanders who chose to look away, or worse, participate, were part of a system built on fear and complicity. What makes this part of the story particularly disturbing is the cold efficiency of the operation. It wasn't just about individual acts of cruelty. It was about building a network where victims were isolated, controlled, and ultimately silenced. The impact on survivors has been profound and lasting. Many speak openly today of trauma, loss of trust, and lifelong scars. Yet, their courage in breaking the silence has inspired a global reckoning with abuse and power. This chapter of Epstein's story reminds us that behind the headlines and sensationalism, real people endured unimaginable pain. And that justice is not just about punishment, but about listening, healing, and change. As we move forward, we will explore how Epstein's flights, properties, and connections all fed into this dark web, and what the fight for truth has revealed about those who enabled it. Because in the shadows of power, the voices of survivors are the brightest light we have. Every empire, no matter how fortified, has its cracks. And for Jeffrey Epstein, those cracks first appeared in the sunny, affluent enclave of Palm Beach, Florida. In 2005, the story that would come to define his downfall began with a seemingly ordinary complaint, a mother reporting that her teenage daughter had been sexually abused. That complaint triggered an investigation that exposed something far more disturbing. Palm Beach police uncovered a pattern of alleged abuse involving multiple underage girls. These weren't isolated incidents. They revealed a systematic operation. Recruitment, grooming, and exploitation all unfolding in the shadows of luxury. Yet, when Epstein was arrested in 2006, the legal process that followed stunned many observers. Despite the severity of the allegations, the prosecution agreed to a plea deal that was unusually lenient. Epstein pleaded guilty to lesser state charges of solicitation of prostitution involving a minor. He served just 13 months in a county jail, with an extraordinary arrangement allowing him to leave the facility for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. A privilege rarely, if ever, granted to inmates accused of similar crimes. What made this plea deal so controversial and suspicious was not only the lightness of the sentence, but the secrecy surrounding it. The agreement was negotiated in a manner that excluded the victims. They were neither informed nor consulted. The deal effectively shielded Epstein from federal charges that could have resulted in decades behind bars. This outcome sparked outrage and confusion. How could a man accused of abusing dozens of underage girls receive such a lenient sentence? How could the justice system appear to bend in favor of a wealthy and connected individual? The public, and the survivors, were left with more questions than answers. As the case unfolded, it became clear that Epstein's influence stretched far beyond Wall Street and the Caribbean. Legal experts, journalists, and activists began to investigate the forces that had shaped the plea agreement. Some pointed to powerful lawyers and lobbyists who represented Epstein. Others speculated that political and financial connections had played a role in securing his freedom. The deal, known as a non-prosecution agreement, also granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators, effectively shutting down broader investigations. For years, this legal maneuver shielded Epstein from further scrutiny, allowing him to maintain his lifestyle and network. But the seeds of suspicion had been planted. The leniency of the sentence, combined with Epstein's continued high-profile associations, raised alarming concerns about justice delayed and possibly denied. In retrospect, Palm Beach was more than a legal battle. It was a glimpse into a system that, in some cases, seems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And it set the stage for a reckoning that would come more than a decade later. Because the story of Jeffrey Epstein is not just about a single man's crimes. It's about the shadows cast by wealth and privilege, shadows long enough to hide secrets that many feared would never see the light of day. In the world of high-profile crimes, some legal agreements become legends, not for their justice, but for their glaring failures. Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 federal plea deal stands as one of the most controversial examples in recent history. Often referred to simply as the sweetheart deal, this agreement raised profound questions about the limits of justice, power, and accountability. The deal came after a lengthy investigation by federal prosecutors into allegations that Epstein had operated a vast network of underage girls for sex trafficking. Many believe the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, documents, and testimonies pointed to a disturbing pattern. Yet, instead of facing a federal trial that could have led to decades behind bars, Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to lesser state charges, solicitation of prostitution, and sentenced to just 13 months in jail. And the terms were exceptional. He was permitted to leave the jail for work release during the day, allowed nearly daily absences that few inmates ever enjoy. But the deal's controversy runs much deeper. Crucially, this plea agreement was negotiated in secret, without notifying Epstein's victims. Victims were unaware of the deal until it was already finalized, a blatant violation of their rights under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. For years, Epstein's legal team and prosecutors successfully kept this arrangement under wraps, ensuring the public and victims had little to no insight into its terms. The deal also included immunity clauses, not just for Epstein, but for any potential co-conspirators. This language effectively protected others implicated in the network, shuttering broader investigations and silencing potential whistleblowers. Legal experts and journalists called it a stunning miscarriage of justice. Some labeled it a systemic failure, where wealth and influence bent the scales in favor of the accused. Questions remain. Was this agreement the result of negligence? A poorly negotiated deal motivated by prosecutorial expediency? Or was it an intentional cover-up, designed to protect powerful figures who might have been exposed? The answers are elusive. Documents released years later revealed intense lobbying by Epstein's defense attorneys, pushing hard for a favorable outcome. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors faced criticism for their failure to communicate with victims or pursue more aggressive charges. Victims themselves fought to have the deal overturned, filing lawsuits alleging their rights were violated. Their courageous efforts eventually led to legal scrutiny and public outrage, but the damage had already been done. This sweetheart deal became a symbol of everything wrong with a justice system that sometimes seems to serve those with money and connections, not the vulnerable. It allowed Epstein to avoid the harshest consequences for years, enabling him to maintain his network, his lifestyle, and most critically, his silence. It was a pivotal moment, one that exposed the dark intersections of power, privilege, and the law. And it's a stark reminder. Justice is only as strong as the system that enforces it. When that system falters, even the most egregious crimes can slip through the cracks. In the coming chapters, we will explore how Epstein's freedom continued until his final arrest, and the complex forces that shaped the last chapter of his story. Because sometimes, the story behind the story is the most important of all. In every dark chapter, there are moments when the truth stands glaringly in front of us, yet somehow, the eyes meant to see it look away. Jeffrey Epstein's story is no exception. For years, prosecutors, law enforcement agents, and public officials had opportunities, countless moments, to intervene, to stop the cycle of abuse. And yet, time and again, the response was muted, delayed, or entirely absent. Why? This question leads us into a labyrinth of complexity. It isn't always a matter of simple neglect or corruption. Sometimes, it's the uncomfortable collision of power, fear, and bureaucracy. Consider the prosecutors tasked with building the case against Epstein. Federal and local authorities had evidence. They interviewed victims. They tracked his properties. And yet, some key decisions baffled observers. Why did some prosecutors negotiate a secretive plea deal, sidelining victims? Why did investigations stall? Why were allegations minimized or dismissed? Part of the answer lies in the influence Epstein wielded. His connections reached into politics, finance, and society's upper echelons. Some suggest his legal team exerted immense pressure behind closed doors, threatening reputations, careers, and futures. Others believe certain officials were simply overwhelmed by the enormity of the case, unsure how to proceed in the face of such power. Then, there's the role of the FBI and local law enforcement. Internal reports revealed missteps and miscommunications. Agents expressed frustration at limited resources, shifting priorities, and even interference. Some crucial evidence was mishandled or overlooked. Witnesses were intimidated, and many survivors felt dismissed or ignored. But the story of looking away extends beyond law enforcement. Public figures, media outlets, and influential social circles also played a role, whether knowingly or unknowingly. There were rumors and whispers of parties attended, friendships maintained, and uncomfortable alliances. The question lingers. How many knew enough to act but chose silence instead? In a world where power can shield wrongdoing, complicity often thrives in silence. Fear of scandal, loss of status, or retaliation can paralyze even the most well-meaning. Yet, history teaches us that turning a blind eye has consequences far greater than the discomfort of confrontation. For Epstein's victims, this silence was not passive, it was active harm. It allowed abuse to continue. It sent a message that some lives were less valued, and some crimes less punishable. In the end, The Eyes That Looked Away is a sobering reflection on how systems and people can fail us. It challenges us to ask hard questions about accountability, courage, and justice. And as we listen quietly tonight, perhaps we can commit to never looking away ourselves. Because sometimes, the first step toward change is simply to see. After years of shadows and silence, after whispers dismissed as rumors, and decades of elusive justice, the storm finally returned. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again. This time, the world was watching. Unlike his previous encounter with the law, this arrest was federal, high-profile, and carried with it the weight of renewed outrage. He was charged with operating a sex trafficking ring, allegedly recruiting and abusing dozens of underage girls across multiple states. The arrest sent shockwaves through the media, governments, and society at large. For many, it was a moment of reckoning, a long overdue confrontation with the darkness that had lurked beneath Epstein's glamorous veneer. New testimonies surfaced. Voices that had once been silenced now spoke with courage and clarity. Survivors came forward to describe their experiences in harrowing detail. Their stories painted a picture of manipulation, coercion, and profound betrayal. The arrest also reignited questions about Epstein's extensive network. Who else was involved? Who else knew? And why had justice taken so long? The public demanded answers. Investigations intensified. Authorities raided Epstein's properties, seizing computers, files, and evidence, hoping to uncover the full extent of the crimes and the identities of accomplices. But the arrest also unleashed controversy. Epstein's connections to powerful individuals fueled speculation and conspiracy theories. Would he implicate others? Would he trade secrets for leniency? Or would the powerful protect him once again? Tragically, just weeks after his arrest, Epstein died in his jail cell. His death, officially ruled a suicide, only deepened the mystery and suspicion surrounding his life and crimes. The storm that had returned with such force was abruptly silenced. But the questions, the pain, and the quest for truth endured. This second arrest marked not just the fall of a man, but the unraveling of a complex web, one that continues to challenge our understanding of justice, power, and accountability. As we listen tonight, let us reflect on the courage of those who spoke out, the shadows that still remain, and the enduring need to confront difficult truths, no matter how unsettling. It was supposed to be the most secure place in the world, a federal detention center where every moment was monitored, every corner observed. Yet, on the night Jeffrey Epstein died, something deeply unsettling occurred. The cameras that were meant to watch his cell? They weren't working. The guards assigned to monitor him? They were reportedly asleep, or distracted, failing to conduct the required checks. These aren't minor details. They're pieces of a puzzle that refuse to fit neatly together. Jeffrey Epstein's death was officially ruled a suicide by hanging, but the circumstances surrounding it have sparked widespread doubt, skepticism, and countless questions. How could such a high-profile inmate, accused of some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, be left so vulnerable? Why were surveillance cameras malfunctioning at such a critical moment? How did two guards responsible for his welfare fall asleep or neglect their duties, facing charges later for falsifying records? Even the timing raises eyebrows. Epstein's death came just weeks after his arrest, when investigators hoped he might reveal information implicating others. The silence that followed his passing was deafening. Multiple forensic experts questioned the official findings. Some suggested evidence of foul play. Others pointed to procedural failures that amounted to gross negligence. Public trust in the investigation plummeted. Conspiracy theories flourished, some proposing that Epstein was silenced to protect powerful figures who might have been exposed. Whether one accepts the official explanation or suspects something darker, the facts remain stark. A man who should have been under constant watch died alone in a cell where eyes were supposed to be unblinking. And in that gap, the failure of the system, lies a haunting reminder that even when justice seems within reach, it can slip through our fingers. That power, influence, and secrets can still operate behind closed doors, even in a jail cell. Tonight, as we reflect on this chapter, we remember the victims waiting for answers, the system that faltered, and the continuing fight for truth. Because some silences are not peaceful, they are imposed. And some deaths leave a question mark heavier than any verdict. In the digital age, a phrase can travel faster than any official report. And few have echoed louder, or more persistently, than the now famous words, "He didn't kill himself." This statement, initially whispered in hushed conversations and late-night talks, exploded into a global meme. It became a rallying cry, a viral punchline, and a symbol of distrust toward official narratives. But what lies beneath the surface of this seemingly simple phrase? To many, it represents something far more profound. A widespread skepticism about the circumstances of Jeffrey Epstein's death. Millions of people, spanning social classes, political affiliations, and continents, have expressed doubt that Epstein's death was a suicide. They question the timing, the failures in jail protocols, the suspicious gaps in surveillance footage, and the potential motives for silencing him. Why such disbelief? At the heart of it is a basic human instinct, to question when the truth feels incomplete or manipulated. When the story doesn't add up. When the silence of those who could explain only deepens the mystery. The meme's popularity also reflects a broader cultural phenomenon. A distrust in institutions, from law enforcement to the media, that are perceived to protect the powerful. For many, Epstein's death symbolizes not just one man's demise, but the failure of a system to deliver real justice. It's a reminder that some truths remain locked away, behind walls of privilege and secrecy. This phrase, repeated on social media, merchandise, and even mainstream conversations, serves as both a protest and a plea. A protest against complacency and concealment. A plea for transparency and accountability. Interestingly, the meme has evolved beyond mere skepticism. It has become a cultural touchstone, a way for people to connect, question, and resist narratives imposed from above. But the question remains: was Epstein silenced? Or was his death truly the tragic conclusion to a troubled life? Official investigations maintain the latter, pointing to medical reports, prison procedures, and internal reviews. Yet, the persistent doubts reflect a larger story, one about power, secrecy, and the difficulty of uncovering truth when so much is at stake. In the end, whether you see, "He didn't kill himself," as a meme, a clue, or a cry for justice, its impact is undeniable. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about accountability, privilege, and the narratives we accept. And as we listen tonight, perhaps we too can hold space for inquiry, balancing skepticism with reason, and always seeking the truth beneath the surface. Behind every powerful figure lies a trail of contacts, a map of influence drawn in ink and paper. For Jeffrey Epstein, two documents became symbols of his hidden world: his flight logs and the infamous Black Book. The flight logs detailed the passengers who boarded Epstein's private planes, sometimes called the Lolita Express. They read like a who's who of wealth, politics, and celebrity. From renowned politicians and business magnates to famous entertainers and academics, the list was staggering. Names included former presidents, members of royal families, high-profile financiers, and renowned scientists. Their presence on these flights alone ignited speculation. Were they simply guests, or something more? The Black Book, a meticulously kept address book, added another layer to the mystery. With hundreds of entries, it contained contact information for influential figures across the globe, some with direct ties to Epstein's social circle, others more tangential. What made this book chilling was the inclusion of names linked to serious allegations of misconduct. Survivors and investigators noted that several individuals listed in the book were accused of participating in or enabling Epstein's alleged trafficking ring. While appearing innocuous on paper, these records suggested a vast, interconnected network, one that blurred the lines between socializing and complicity. But the significance of the flight logs and Black Book goes beyond mere names. They painted a portrait of Epstein's ability to cultivate relationships across diverse arenas: political, financial, and cultural. Each flight was more than transportation. It was a moving stage for meetings, introductions, and perhaps transactions too sensitive to be recorded elsewhere. Some flights lasted hours, crossing continents and oceans, shuttling powerful individuals to Epstein's various properties, including his private island. The logs also revealed a pattern of frequent travel by underage girls, often accompanied by known recruiters. This raised urgent questions. Were these flights used to facilitate illicit activities? Did those who boarded know the full extent of Epstein's operations? Or were some simply unaware passengers caught in a web larger than themselves? The contents of the Black Book, meanwhile, fueled endless investigations, lawsuits, and media scrutiny. Some entries turned out to be false leads. Others opened doors to uncomfortable truths. Yet, many names remain shielded by privacy laws and non-disclosure agreements, keeping the full scope of Epstein's connections out of public reach. What these documents ultimately reveal is the scale and complexity of Epstein's world. A world where power, secrecy, and influence collided, creating a network that both dazzled and intimidated. As we consider the flight logs and the Black Book tonight, we are reminded that in the shadows of power, every name matters, every connection counts. Because sometimes, the story is not just about the man, but about the many who orbit around him. Behind every story of power and manipulation, there is often a shadow figure, someone who operates not in the spotlight, but in its margins. For Jeffrey Epstein, that figure was Ghislaine Maxwell. A British socialite, daughter of the media mogul Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's life was marked by privilege, charm, and complexity. She entered Epstein's world in the early 1990s, quickly becoming his closest confidant and, as many believe, a key architect of his empire. Their relationship was shrouded in mystery for years. To the public, she was a glamorous presence at Epstein's parties and events. To survivors and prosecutors, she was much more, a central figure in recruiting and grooming young girls. Maxwell's role in the network went far beyond companionship. Testimonies during her trial painted a chilling portrait of a woman deeply involved in the operation. She was accused of identifying vulnerable girls, building their trust, and then facilitating their exploitation. Survivors described her as both manipulative and calculating, a gatekeeper controlling access to Epstein and his associates. The trial that finally took place years after Epstein's death was more than a courtroom drama. It became a window into the darker corners of the network they had built together. Witness after witness shared detailed accounts of Maxwell's actions, accounts that exposed the scale and sophistication of the abuse. Her conviction was a landmark moment, sending a clear message that even those who operate in the shadows can be brought into the light. But the trial also revealed complexities. Maxwell's defense portrayed her as a scapegoat, claiming she was unfairly targeted after Epstein's death, left to bear the full weight of their shared crimes. The case ignited debates about justice, power, and accountability, questions about who else might be implicated, and how far the network truly extended. Beyond legal proceedings, Maxwell's story serves as a sobering reminder that abuse of power often involves complicity and active participation. She was not merely a side character, but a key player, one whose actions enabled and perpetuated harm on a massive scale. Tonight, as we examine Ghislaine Maxwell's place in this saga, we confront uncomfortable truths about trust, betrayal, and the faces behind the headlines. Because sometimes, the most dangerous roles are played not from the spotlight, but from the shadows. Where did the evidence go? In any complex investigation, evidence is the lifeblood of justice. It is the thread that weaves truth from suspicion, turning whispers into convictions. Yet, in Jeffrey Epstein's case, the trail of evidence is marked by alarming gaps: disks that disappeared, tapes that went missing, hard drives that were damaged beyond recovery. This raises a pressing question. Where did the evidence go? When federal agents raided Epstein's properties, his Manhattan mansion, his Palm Beach home, and his private island, they seized an immense trove of potential proof. Computers, files, photographs, and video recordings were taken into custody, promising to unlock secrets long hidden. But almost immediately, investigators encountered obstacles. Reports surfaced of hard drives found damaged, rendering some data inaccessible. Videotapes that might have captured incriminating moments were either missing or unusable. Physical documents were misplaced or destroyed. These losses weren't trivial. They struck at the heart of the case, hampering efforts to identify victims, witnesses, and accomplices. Some attribute these gaps to negligence, overwhelmed agencies struggling to process vast amounts of material. Others see something more sinister: deliberate sabotage aimed at protecting powerful interests. The notion of tampered or destroyed evidence adds fuel to the fires of conspiracy theories. How many secrets were lost forever? How many names and stories remain buried? Survivors and advocates have long demanded transparency and accountability over the handling of evidence. They argue that every piece lost is a setback in the pursuit of justice. Not only for Epstein but for all those who suffered. This erosion of material undermines faith in the system. It suggests that even with overwhelming suspicion, justice can be hindered not just by the law, but by the disappearance of truth itself. Yet, despite these setbacks, investigators continue to piece together the fragments that remain, searching for any clue, any detail that might reveal the full scope of the crimes. As we reflect on the missing evidence tonight, we are reminded that truth is fragile, that it requires vigilance, care, and courage to protect it, and that even in the darkest moments, the fight for justice depends on those who refuse to let the trail go cold. In the aftermath of Jeffrey Epstein's rise and fall, the shadows grew deeper. Not just from what was revealed, but from what was left unanswered. Where facts fade, theories often flourish. And in Epstein's case, these theories have become a persistent undercurrent. Whispered in corners, debated online, and dissected in documentaries. One of the most pervasive ideas is that Epstein's network was not merely about personal gain or illicit pleasure, but intertwined with international espionage. Some speculate that his vast connections across governments and corporations made him an asset, a collector of secrets used for blackmail. A man who could leverage compromising information on powerful figures, effectively controlling or influencing global agendas. This theory suggests a darker purpose behind Epstein's trafficking operations. Not just exploitation, but a mechanism of political leverage. Closely related is the notion of political blackmail. If Epstein gathered sensitive information during his infamous flights and parties, some believe he, and by extension, those who protected him, used this material to manipulate decisions, careers, even entire administrations. The idea of secret files and recordings hidden away in safes or encrypted drives has captivated the public imagination, fueling countless theories about the true extent of his influence. Further still, there are whispers of elite cults and secret societies, operating behind closed doors. Allegations of ritualistic behavior, coded communications, and exclusive circles that transcend conventional power structures swirl amid the rumors. Though these claims often lack concrete evidence, their persistence speaks to a broader cultural fascination with hidden hierarchies and forbidden knowledge. Why do these theories endure? Perhaps because Epstein's story touches on fundamental fears of betrayal by those we trust, of justice denied, of darkness lurking beneath polished surfaces. They also highlight the frustration many feel about unanswered questions, about missing evidence, unexplained deaths, and the seeming immunity of certain players. Whether rooted in fact, speculation, or a mix of both, these theories serve as a reminder. The pursuit of truth is rarely straightforward. It is often tangled with complexity, contradiction, and the challenge of separating reality from myth. As we explore these lingering shadows tonight, let us do so with open minds and critical eyes, recognizing the difference between evidence and conjecture, while never losing sight of the victims whose stories must remain at the center. Because in the dark, even the faintest light of truth matters. In the wake of Jeffrey Epstein's downfall, one question echoes louder than most. Why did so many powerful figures escape accountability? Despite the swirling allegations, lawsuits, and media scrutiny, a striking number of individuals connected to Epstein have never faced legal consequences. This reality reveals a sobering truth about the complex intersection of power, privilege, and the justice system. At its core, the Epstein case exposed a network that extended far beyond a single man. It was a web woven through elite circles, politicians, business magnates, celebrities, and royals. Yet, when the spotlight turned toward these figures, many appeared to vanish into the shadows, untouchable and shielded. Several factors contribute to this widespread impunity. First, the enormous influence these individuals wield cannot be underestimated. Their wealth, political connections, and social capital often provide formidable legal defense teams, lobbying power, and media influence. Tools that can shape narratives and delay or derail investigations. Second, the culture of secrecy and loyalty within elite circles fosters an environment where silence is currency. The fear of exposure, scandal, or retaliation can deter witnesses and victims from speaking out. Non-disclosure agreements, settlements, and intimidation tactics further complicate efforts to bring powerful people to justice. Third, systemic issues within the legal framework itself can hinder progress. Prosecutors may face political pressure or resource limitations when pursuing high-profile cases. Jurisdictions might avoid entanglement with influential figures to preserve reputations or alliances. Moreover, the complexity of proving involvement in a sprawling, clandestine operation presents its own challenges. Evidence is often sparse, witnesses reluctant, and crimes carefully concealed. The result is a system that, intentionally or not, protects those at the top, while the vulnerable bear the brunt of injustice. This dynamic fuels public outrage and distrust. It challenges the very notion of equal justice under the law. Yet, it also underscores the importance of relentless advocacy, investigative journalism, and survivor courage. Because exposing impunity is the first step toward dismantling it. As we consider why so many remain untouched, we must confront uncomfortable realities about how power operates in society. And we must ask ourselves what it will take to break cycles of protection and silence. For in this pursuit lies the hope of real accountability, and a justice system that serves all, not just the privileged few. Some events ripple far beyond their immediate context, shaking the very foundations of how we see the world. Jeffrey Epstein's case was one such event, a cultural aftershock that reverberated through society's core conversations about power, abuse, and the silence that often surrounds both. Before Epstein, discussions about elite sex trafficking rings, abuse by the powerful, and systemic cover-ups were often relegated to the fringes, considered taboo, dismissed as conspiracy, or simply ignored. His story shattered that silence. Suddenly, the world was forced to confront uncomfortable truths. How privilege can shield wrongdoing, how wealth can corrupt justice, and how victims' voices are too often drowned out by the noise of influence. The case ignited a global reckoning. It gave courage to survivors everywhere to speak up, to share stories that had long been buried. It fueled movements demanding accountability and transparency, challenging institutions, from governments to media outlets, to do better. In the public sphere, the case sparked heated debates about the limits of power and the urgent need for reform. It also exposed the dangers of complicity and complacency, how societies can become bystanders when abuse thrives in shadows. Artists, writers, filmmakers, and journalists took up the story, translating its complex layers into powerful cultural expressions that continue to provoke thought and inspire change. Yet, the cultural aftershock is not just about awareness, it is about transformation. It calls on us to question the systems that allow abuse to flourish, to recognize that justice is not only a legal matter but a moral imperative, and to remember that silence is often the greatest accomplice. As we reflect tonight, we acknowledge that Epstein's story has become a mirror, reflecting both the darkest corners of human nature and the resilient light of those who dare to seek truth. This aftershock continues to ripple, encouraging vigilance, empathy, and a commitment to justice that transcends status and wealth. Because change begins when we listen, when we believe, and when we refuse to look away. Every dark chapter leaves behind echoes, whispers that linger long after the final page is turned. Jeffrey Epstein's legacy is no exception. His crimes and the storm that followed cast a long, poisoned shadow, a legacy woven with fear, secrecy, and profound distrust. For the survivors, this legacy is deeply personal, a reminder of pain, trauma, and the struggle for justice amid a system that often seemed stacked against them. But for society at large, Epstein's case has fostered a pervasive atmosphere of suspicion. People question the motives of those in power. They wonder who is truly accountable. They fear the hidden networks that may still operate beyond public scrutiny. This legacy of fear is reinforced by unanswered questions, the missing evidence, the silenced witnesses, and the untouchable elite. Conspiracy theories flourish not simply because of imagination, but because of genuine gaps in transparency and truth. In the wake of Epstein, public trust in institutions, legal, political, even media, has eroded. The notion that some individuals can evade consequences due to wealth or connections is a bitter pill for many. Yet, amid the whispers and fear, there is also resilience. Communities of survivors and advocates have formed, determined to reclaim their voices and demand change. Journalists continue to investigate, uncovering new leads and shining light where darkness once prevailed. And society grapples with the urgent need to rebuild trust, to create systems that protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. This legacy challenges us all. It asks, how do we confront the unseen? How do we dismantle silence? How do we ensure history does not repeat itself? As we listen tonight, we hold space for both the fear and the hope, knowing that even the darkest legacies can inspire the brightest transformations. Because in the end, it is not just about the man who caused the harm, but about the world that must heal and change in his wake. As the night deepens and the story unfolds toward its close, we find ourselves facing a haunting truth. Despite all the revelations, all the investigations, and all the trials, there remain so many questions, unanswered, unresolved, and perhaps never to be fully known. Who else was involved in the vast network Epstein allegedly commanded? Which secrets remain buried, locked away, and evidence lost or hidden? What true extent of power and influence shaped the protections he enjoyed? These questions echo in the silence that surrounds the case. A silence filled with the whispers of victims, the shadows of elites, and the gaps in justice. We may never know the full story. Some truths may be deliberately obscured. Others may simply be lost to time, fear, or destruction. Yet, the persistence of these questions serves a vital purpose. They remind us that truth is a journey, not a destination. That the search for justice is ongoing, requiring vigilance, courage, and relentless inquiry. They call on us to listen carefully to the voices still unheard, to believe the survivors, to challenge complacency, and to demand accountability. And though this story may feel like a closed chapter, its impact lives on, in conversations, in reforms sought, and in the collective consciousness of a world unwilling to forget. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, carry with you this reflection: that some stories are never truly finished, that their shadows stretch long, shaping the dawn of change yet to come. And in those shadows, there is both caution and hope. Because even when questions remain, the pursuit of truth continues. And that, perhaps, is the most important story of all. As we come to the end of this story tonight, I invite you to reflect on the shadows we've explored, the mysteries, the unanswered questions, and the voices that demand to be heard. Thank you for allowing me to guide you through this complex and haunting tale. Your time, your attention, and your curiosity mean more than words can say. If this story stirred something within you, I encourage you to share your thoughts, wherever you are in the world, whatever hour it is. Remember, every question asked and every story told is a step toward light in the darkest corners. Until next time, rest well, and good night.